Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea Mathern. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief. Good afternoon, Rebecca.
Good afternoon, Andrea.
We usually record in the morning, so I'm like a little thrown off, but it's so wonderful to see your face.
Yeah, good to see you too.
How is your heart this afternoon?
Yeah, my heart it's so quiet. It's so quiet. And I didn't sort of recognize that until I got quiet and just sort of could realize, I've been going and going this past week. And then today it was like all of the humans are out of the house. It's so quiet at home. We're about to have visitors again, but I just had this moment to myself and I was like closed my eyes because I felt maybe a little tired, but I was like, oh, I don't even want to sleep. I just want to be quiet. So it's really nice. And there's a little sadness there. And I think kind of in the way that sadness can be there and you don't quite know why, but you're just like, oh, sadness is here. So there's just a little sadness bubbling up and we'll see if it reveals the why or if it just wants to be felt. It's just what's here.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. How about you? How is your heart this afternoon?
My heart feels pretty bubbly for a couple of reasons. One, we are so lucky to have had au pairs as part of our life, which always sounds so fancy because it's a French word, but really it's like childcare saving technique for having two twins. And we've had them since the boys were about 4 months old. And the au pair that we have now, his father passed away really suddenly. And so I sort of like got him on a plane, sent him back to Spain as quickly as I could so he could be with his family. And after a few weeks, he came home last night and he was so happy to be home. And the boys were so happy to see him, just like, come look at this. And they have like a real boyish relationship with him that you can't have with me, like just saying gross, silly things, pee and poop jokes,
Not your thing.
Which actually I'm pretty good at pee and poop jokes now, but like punching and just a really sort of like roughhousey relationship. So it's been really sweet to see them welcome him back so happily and to see him feel happy and stable at home after such a big life event. And then we're about to get right to this, but also like my heart is super bubbly because our guest today, it's actually like this funny surprise of universal coincidences that Hannah and I met over the summer. We were in a shamanic journeying workshop for an entire weekend together. And I remember there were a lot of people in that room and I remember her very, very crystal clearly. And so as you were talking about bringing your friend Hannah on the show and movement, and one day you said, like, each other. You were in the shamanic journeying workshop. And I was like, oh my God, Hannah. And so I just feel my heart is super bubbly to see her face and to hear her and just listen to her walk us through the power of movement in our bodies. So my heart feels really exuberant and joyful about this reconnection.
Yay. I'm so glad.
Yeah. So I will tell everybody else a little bit about her. So Hannah Kinderlehrer is a devoted advocate for Mama Earth and all of her creatures. She is a mover and a shaker, quite literally. She is dedicated to fostering connection within individuals, between individuals, and between people and Earth. Hannah is the founder and teacher trainer of Awaken the Dance, and she offers her holistic coaching services through Rise in Thrive coaching. Hannah's work integrates all sorts of her studies from Hakomi, which is a sort of practice in psychology, shamanic journey work, embodiment practices, and nervous system resilience. And she is going to shed light on what all of those mean to those of us lay people who are just entering this world. She's also had her own journey with chronic illness, which has made her well-versed in what brings health and well-being. And she shares that through her coaching, her shamanic journey dances, workshops, retreats, and groups, which she offers both internationally and nationally. So I am so excited to welcome to the podcast, Hannah.
Wow. Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here.
We're so happy to see you. Hannah, how is your heart this afternoon?
There's definitely a little like champagne fizziness at reconnecting with both of you, Rebecca, who I've known forever but haven't had as much contact with as I think either of us would enjoy.
I know.
And then Andrea, to reconnect with you after such a special weekend together, and weaving that back together feels bubbly. And then there's also this real tender part, a little bit lower. I just came from working with a client, and we were working with child parts and giving back shame and giving back the messages that were never meant for her.
Mm.
And it was so tender and so sweet and so empowering. So I'm still just sort of swimming in that tenderness, and also that feeling of like, why couldn't I have been everybody's mom? Like everybody
Oh,
deserves so much unconditional love and acceptance,
Mhm.
and so few of us got it. So also
Mm.
swimming in that, a little bit of grief and a little tenderness around the way that all of us were parented to the best of our parents' ability, and none of us really got exactly what we needed. And it's
mm.
human, but it's tender.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for dropping in and sharing the completeness of your heart as it is right now. So, we have been starting off with asking our guests sort of about their grief origin story. And by that, we've been meaning like the first time grief revealed itself as grief and sort of shifted the way that we see the world. And so, we're curious about when that phrase is sort of shared with you, grief origin story, what comes up for you?
Hmm. That's such a sweet question. So, this is a memory that I've come back to a million times in my life, actually, and reworked, and has a lot to do with what we were just talking about, that care. And it's like a silly story, but it's like when I got that physical feeling of like, oh, my heart.
Yeah.
I had this sweet little cat stuffed animal
Mm.
that I loved, and traded it to my younger sister for some other toy. And I had a lot of insomnia as a kid. I had a lot of like fears and nightmares that kept me awake as a kid. And so I'm awake as always in my top bunk. I got two sisters below me and below that in the
Mhm.
trundle bed. And I'm just lying there and I'm looking, and my sister had left the stuffed animal cat on the floor just by herself. And I just felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest, that this little stuffed animal was not being cared for the way that I had cared for it. And I was too scared to get out of bed. I was so scared of like things jumping up and getting me. So I
Mm.
was frozen in bed. But I'm watching this little cat be like abandoned on the floor, and it touched my own abandonment, core wounds, and trauma that I actually think we all have because we are alienated from Mother Earth, the Great Mother. So I think we all have this core wound of abandonment, and it just really played out in that moment of this is a creature who's not being taken care of.
Mm.
And so much of my grief throughout my life has been about when people are not being cared for in the way that they deserve, which is unconditionally loved. And whether that's the earth or people not having their basic needs met or not being loved, I mean, all the myriad ways in which sentient beings aren't cared for really tugs at my heart in a real physical way. They can send me into a real childhood state if I let it,
Mm.
or I can really use my resilience to move into compassion practice instead.
Mm.
That's so beautiful. I love that reflection. And I appreciate if you want to label it silly, but for me it feels so profound and like innocent in this way of like that you learned so much about your own heart and the way that you view caretaking in the world. And also so interesting is you're going to talk with us a lot about movement. And you said like you felt frozen, unable to sort of like direct your body to do what your heart so wanted you to do.
Mhm.
Exactly. Wow. Thanks for weaving that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my own grief, I mean, as you were telling the story, even I was like, oh my gosh, totally flashed on this stuffed Tigger animal, like stuffed animal Tigger that I had, that I was searching the house for, could not find. And we realized I had left it outside and the dog destroyed it.
Oh.
And my mom does listen to this podcast, and I love you, but this was not your finest parenting moment. She said, well, that's what you get.
Oh.
Right.
Ooh,
Yeah,
ouch.
so just like that way that our hearts are like so tender and like that animal is as real as anything with a beating heart. And yeah, I just feel like thank you for bringing in an early story that is not
Yeah.
at all silly.
Totally. Well, then just like getting on stuffed animals. So my son recently, we have a cabin in the mountains and he has like this little prairie dog named Perry. And my brother and sister-in-law used the cabin and we came back and Perry's eye was gone and his like little nose was bitten off.
Mm.
Oh my gosh. Gabriel's heart was so broken. I'm really glad I didn't have one of my unfinest parenting moments, of which I have, a pocket full of. But I will admit, I did send a message to my brother and sister in law who are his godparents. And I was like, you have officially broken your godson's heart. And he says, your dog's not allowed to come to the cabin. They did feel really bad. They did really bad. But I was like, we can sew it. We can, make do. So we're trying to find the perfect eyeball for Perry, or we might make him a little eye
Oh,
patch.
yes. Yes.
But it is so real. So I too, it just makes me tender about that moment and the heartbreak that Gabriel was experiencing in that moment. And like, I love that we all connected to it.
The tenderness, just like that care for this like inanimate being that feels so animate to us
Mhm.
when we're young, right? Because
Right.
imagination and reality are so, interwoven at that age.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've heard it described as ensouling.
Mm,
It's like
Yeah.
we're putting soul in these objects that we don't consider
mm.
living or
It's like
animate.
the Velveteen Rabbit.
About to say the same
Yeah.
thing. It's so beautiful. And you think about like, it's like this thing that as a child, you don't have a lot of like responsibility for other things yet. And so you have this responsibility for this little thing that you love. And you probably were really careful about if you were going to trade it to your sister for what it was worth to trade. And then to see that the trade wasn't quite as elevated to her as it was to you was, I can imagine how it just felt like, I've let my little stuffy
I've
down.
abandoned this cat.
Mm,
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. I love that.
yeah. So fast forwarding your tender heart into like your adult life. I know you, so I'm just gonna do a mini Rebecca reflection bio
Love it.
that's about how I know you. But I first met you in an Awaken the dance class. I went to it. I liked the
Mm.
description. And at the time, I was in a tremendous amount of grief from a breakup. And I was learning through just having accidentally done maybe a movement class or something. I was like, oh, my body wants to move this stuff. And so I came in and I feel like just in the first circle, I mean, I was in tears. It felt like everyone else who shared was in tears. And then we all danced together. And it was really profound for
Mm.
me to have space to just move. I didn't really feel drawn to like a choreographed class. So it was something about the
Mm.
unchoreographed nature and the fact that I could just move how I wanted to move. Don't understand how I got out of self-consciousness in that moment. That also must have been a setup of yours. But, how did you start to find movement? Like so we're talking about, right, Andrea weaving in this like frozen moment. How did you start to find, oh, movement
Mm.
is my path?
Yeah.
In some ways, it's just never not been. Like I have just been
Mm.
moving my whole like a 2-year-old in the dance class who was like, I know everybody else is doing this, but like I'm doing this. Like it's just sort of like always been a part of my world. I've taken dance classes my whole life, never professionally,
Mm,
always for pleasure.
Mm.
So I was just taking a ton of classes and finding which styles worked best for me. And definitely African is like my most body's organic movements come alive in African dance.
Mm.
And I would leave class feeling like I had lost 20 pounds of emotional baggage.
Mm.
Especially because it's so spinal cord based. It's so central nervous system, the movements. And then you add the bilateral. And not my first teacher, but my most consistent teacher, Maputa Mensa, who taught at Naropa, teaches at CU, teaches all over, used to say like, in Africa, you're sick, you're dying, you dance. You're
mm,
pregnant, you're in labor, you dance. Somebody dies, you dance. Like
Mm.
that's what you do, you dance. And that just was like hummed in my cells. I was like, And so I was trained in soul sweat, which is an awesome form of sort of like fitness dance, but with like soul to it,
Mhm.
like this real soul to it. And then I started teaching these workshops, these deeper dives of like, okay, well, how do I actually combine everything I love? And these workshops came out of a lot of people in the dance world, whether I was teaching at Colorado West Athletic Club or Alchemy of Movement or what was Block 1750 or what was another studio in South Boulder that I forget the name of. And people were like, what makes you you? Like, what's your deal? Like, there's something about you, which like really caught me off guard. And I was like, well, these are my favorite things: meditation, embodied meditation, community, and dance. And so I started combining these in these workshops
Mm.
where we would do that and then we would have lunch. And then I broke my back
Oh.
and I could no longer teach choreography. The injury was too deep. And so I started just teaching this. And this just became its whole own paradigm, Awaken the Dance, of how do we really drop in and listen to what's here on the sensation level, on the emotional level, on the soul level, and move from that place. How do we connect with each other from that place? And then how do we gather and bear witness to each other and each other's journey? And then how do we dedicate what we just had to all beings everywhere? And so that's basically what Awaken the Dance is. And the number one feedback I get from people about that is this is the safest I've ever felt in community.
Mm.
And this is the most permission I've ever had to be in my body and be who I am and move in just the right way for me.
Mm.
And so it sort of came out of my need for that. And with Lyme disease, I was having to take medical leave from dance all the time because this would go out and that would go out. And then I had a 60-day migraine and then I couldn't lift my legs. The fatigue was so intense. And so it's like, I needed a form where I could show up to. And so 2 weeks after I broke my back, I was teaching this with a walker.
Mm.
And I broke my elbow and I didn't even take off a week. I went with my cast. It's like, you can show up to this class however you want. And then that sort of morphed into becoming more workshop. And I stopped teaching weekly classes and started just teaching deep dives and workshops and my summer dances, dancing on the earth, and just making it fuller and including authentic relating, including relating to land ancestors and lineage ancestors, and just diving into earth, nature, spirituality. So it just keeps growing and growing and growing like on its own. And I think I've trained over 20 people in this at this point.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's sort of my movement work. But I just think that separate from just like how this shows up in like a work context, I think just at a very young age, I was like, this is too big for my body. Like I came in feeling everything. Like my baby book, when your parents like write about you, like every single entry is like, you are so sensitive. You feel everything. You
Oh.
attune to everyone. You're tracking us all the time. Like,
Ah.
and I've had like a million intuitive psychics, readers, shamanic practitioners be like, you feel grass grow on the other side of the plant. I'm like, I know. So like, I think a big part of it has been like, that can't stay locked up in here. It's too freaking much.
Yeah.
And so movement has become a way for me to feel it, to release it, feel it, to move it, feel it, to transmute it, not to push it away and say, no, I'm not going to feel this, but to say, if I am going to feel this, if I'm going to feel everything, I need the accompaniment of my helping spirits and support and Mama Earth. And I need a movement practice that helps it not get stuck, but helps liberate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I imagine that at a young age, you sort of became introduced to dance in a more traditional sort of setting, like maybe you learned.
Yeah. Jazz.
Yeah. Jazz, tap, ballet. Those are the ones all my girl cousins did. I didn't. That wasn't my path. But then was it through the soul sweat that it sort of started to emerge as, not trying to put words in your mouth, but more of like a spiritual integration of dance and this other thing that your soul really needed that it offered you?
I would say it happened even before that. I would say it happened when I would go to a dance event a club and I'd be having this like huge catharsis on the dance floor, and like whoever I was with would sort of be like reining me in, and I'd just be like, hold on, I'm like moving through 7-year-old trauma right now. Like I would say that like any kind of like festival experience, dance experience, it just became so clear to me that it was not like the performance or the performative or the looking good part of dance was not what was feeding. That it was the like almost dissolving the separation between Hana and music and what is, and the community of, you know, nervous systems and mammals in a room. That is like I could tap into that dissolve really quick through movement and just have these huge experiences where I just felt like a different person on the other side of it, or a non-person, just like energy or whatever it was. I would say it was almost like that experience of like going out dancing through my teens and 20s that unlocked that for me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and I think about, I do feel like dance is our birthright. And then I think that there's sort of the way that it becomes performative in our world that it's like, she's a dancer, I'm not. So the movie Moana, we had the version that had the like making of Moana. And so they were interviewing all the people because they had all South Pacific Islanders in the movie, except for the guy who did the voice of the rooster, which is just, you know, he's really funny because he's like, I was Juilliard trained. And like,
And
this is,
fucking the
he's
rooster
just
is like, I love it.
But they said when we started to cast and we were auditioning everyone, there was not one person who couldn't sing. And that the same thing was true of dance and movement, that they had grown up singing and dancing and moving together in a way that there wasn't a, you're a singer and you're not a singer. You're a dancer and you're not a dancer. And so I recognized, and in that freedom of being able to move how my body wanted to move, that there also was just grief of, I didn't get to do this my whole life. Like I didn't know I needed to move, and that I just left my last PT appointment today, and he was like, so the pain that you have isn't there anymore, but I do want to give you the feedback that you are so stiff. I'm like, yeah, welcome to my life. Like I know this, that it's so much holding, you know, it's not something that I do regularly.
Yeah.
And part of us doing this episode and the timing of the episode is also around movement practices that could support people in the holidays. And we just did a workshop last Saturday, Andrea and I, which I also was like, and my heart also still feels tender about that day. It was so beautiful. And I just did like the lightest movement pieces, but we got feedback like, gosh, that was so helpful. But it wasn't a full dance. You know, it was just like starting to move your body, starting to feel those things. So what is the wisdom of dance and grief?
I love that question. So first of all, let's just say grief is physical, right? Like grief is so physical. Like it literally interrupts the way blood flows. Like the way that some people, when they're grieving, think now that they've got neurodegenerative disease or Alzheimer's because they can't think anymore. It's like, no, the blood flow is going to the limbic system and the amygdala, not the prefrontal cortex and not the vagus nerve that regulates us. And that's why like we can't eat or we eat too much. We can't listen to the signals of our body. Like everything goes into dysregulation with grief, right? It's like the same as like PTSD. They're like body interrupters. And so then we get to interrupt the interruption by bringing movement back in and heal that pathway. Just because grief is so physical and so manifests in the body. Like you can see when someone's grieving, right? Like whether they tell you or not. Like I think of Rebecca, that story you told me of seeing an author and just being like, I'm hearing the grief. You know, it's like we know these things, right? So when I found out my grandfather died, which was the first sudden death in my life, I literally went into shock. And I found myself like half a mile from my house in a city on a dark night. And I was like, what just happened? It's like my body just went into gear. It was like, move. Like you have to move. And walking is actually one of the best ways to work with grief because number one, we're outside. We have a bigger view. We can go back into parasympathetic and we're doing this bilateral movement. So like if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not gonna fucking dance. I've never danced. Why would I dance now? Don't dance. Walk.
Yes.
Walk. Swing your limbs. Walk. So that's like the first thing I would say is just that like our bodies are designed to re-regulate through movement. And in fact, it's the only thing that does. And I think about this as like when you're freaking out and someone's like, calm down. Does that help? No, like it just, that's like a mental message for a physical process.
Right.
What we have to do is mirror breath for that person and be like, yeah, this is so much, huh? Let's take a deep breath together and let our nervous system co-regulate that person's nervous system, right? It has to be body to body. And so dance and grief, what I would say is that for me, when grief hits real hard, which it does a lot, my body wants to go into dorsal vagal. It wants to go into shutdown, collapse, freeze. And the words that are coming into my mind on a mantra repeat tape loop are, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And that's a very young child state that I go into of overwhelm, because when I was so young and feeling everything, it was too much and I couldn't do it. And I wasn't accompanied the way that we need attunement and accompaniment in feelings at any stage, but especially as children, right? So that happens. And I'm like, right, so we know this. And the first thing I do is put my hand on my heart and I just say, just this breath, just this next breath, just this heartbeat. And that gets me knowing like, okay, I'm still alive. Like I am not actually going into a frozen, immobilized state 20 feet underground where it's dark and I'm going to be left alone for the rest of my life. Like actually just this next breath. And once I can sort of get that back online, and once I'm feeling my breath, that means I'm moving back through dorsal vagal, up through sympathetic, with just starting to glimpse that somewhere at the top of the ladder is polyvagal, ventral vagal, right? That means ventral vagal means safe and connected. So I'm definitely not there yet, but I can glimpse that there is movement on the ladder. I'm going to start to move up from this collapse into my breath. Now I'm feeling some activation. That's sympathetic. And I don't want to go all the way now into fight flight sympathetic of grief, which is real, right? Like anxiety is huge with grief. After my friend Allie died, oh my God, the anxiety, oh my God. So in this stage, maybe we were ready to dance and maybe we're not. And so one thing that really helps me as I start to leave dorsal vagal and come into sympathetic is movement that actually I can follow, like Qigong. So I'll go to YouTube and I'll put on like gentle Qigong and I'll follow someone else's movements that have me coordinating breath and movement. Or yoga would be great for this. I can't ruminate. I can't stay in the rumination and the fear because I'm paying attention. I hate to say mind-body connection because I think the mind-body are one. But what I would say is it's an invitation to deepen that awareness of not letting the thoughts take me out of what's present, and deepen the connection to what's right here, what's right now is this movement, this breath, and I'm following along. And once I've done that and I'm a little more stabilized and the anxiety has gotten quieter, now I'm going to want to dance and move the energy. And so I always have playlists that are like perfect for this. So I have a grief playlist. I have an earth grief playlist. I have a shake it out playlist. I have a soothing playlist. I've got like a million playlists. And if you go onto my website, actually, I have a whole tab that says playlists. And there's like 100 playlists there. And they all have this arc of experience of like ambient and chill to like shake your shit, to bring it down, celebrate and integrate. So, because they're all from my dance classes. And so then it's like, okay, pulling out the right playlist for the right moment. Like after October 7th happened, I needed Middle Eastern music. I needed to connect with my roots. And so I had all these Middle Eastern music playing of every religion and every tradition that comes from that area. So it's like, then I can be in the place where I can like, okay, now what is the wisdom of my body? Sometimes it's defend and no, and this is too much and I can't. And I need protection and I need to, and sometimes it's, I need to actually discharge and just like, move it out. And sometimes the discharge can be super oceanic. and fluid. It doesn't have to be chaotic, but I'm still discharging. And sometimes it needs to be like sharp and exhale. And those exhales bring me into this sort of metallic movement where I get to like sort of recreate my boundaries and what I'm willing to feel and not feel in any given moment. And then those boundaries can start to soften and we can make a melt until there's a yielding. And then I just want to like often lay on the ground and sort of do sort of a squid jellyfish dance where like maybe my back is supported by the ground and just my limbs can sort of find this weightlessness. So it's like all different ways. There's never one way. But it's like, what next? What next? What next? And so those are like broader practices. And they're not exactly what I would say for during the holidays, like dealing with family. What I would say for I actually made like a list of like quick and dirty ones because we can't be like, let me go grab a playlist. I'll be back in an hour and a half, everybody. Don't eat without me, you know?
Totally.
Or like, you got the turkey. I'm going to go dance. Like we can't like necessarily do that. So here are some like quick ones you can do like in the bathroom, like where you're like pee break or like, I just got to grab something from the bedroom.
Yeah.
Right. Like these are ones you can do there. And so the first one I live by is like, wearing my body is this grief. Just like, first of all, where is it? Oh, okay. So it's like here. And then it kind of feels like this is the like physical manifestation of it. It's like crunchy and crinkly, like cellophane, or it's like a lump of coal that's like super heavy, or it's like burning fire and it's got some rage to it, or it's like sparky and spiky. And it, like, if it had words, it'd be like, fuck off, fuck off, fuck off, right? Like whatever it is, like, get a little granular with the physicality and sensation because the story of it doesn't really matter right now. Like that's for like you and your therapist to work out later. Like it doesn't matter right now. What matters is how is it alive in the body? And so we feel that. And then we sort of drop the story of it's right, it's wrong. I can't believe I'm feeling this. I wish I wasn't. Those are stories and they may feel true and maybe they are. Right now, none of those matter. What matters is this is what's happening in the body. I'm going to bring my awareness there, maybe with my hands and my breath. I'm going to tell it belongs. Grief in whatever form you are in, or rage, or anxiety, or prickliness, or irritation. You belong. And then I'm going to start moving with it. And I'm just going to be like, okay, what do you need in this moment? Do you need like, just a big like indexation yawn that turns on the ventral vagal? Do you need humming and rocking, which is soothing for the ventral vagal? Do you need pushing and saying maybe like, no, no way? Or do you need to just like get on the ground and feel the support of the earth coming through the floor and holding you and maybe rocking like a baby? Yielding to gravity. Like, what does this sensation need in this moment? And then I wait until that sensation feels like it has lessened and it's got some more just like neutrality to it. And then I like really like thank myself. And so that might be like a hug. Often, I know this is like the silliest, but like this is my new practice is I kiss. Thank you. Thank you, body. Thank you, body. Thanks for feeling these feelings. I've got this. And I might just sort of like do like a shake off like cats do. And make my way back into the world. So those are just like quick and dirty ones. I think self-care during the holidays is so necessary. And I think exercise in the traditional sense, not necessary in the holidays. Like when we just like have so little time and we're doing so much, like we're burning so many calories of stress and preparing the food and doing the shopping and the cooking and the cleaning and the driving and the traffic and everything speeds up. I feel like those like making sure we've walked our steps or lifted weights can like dissolve a little bit. And there can be just like more tending, walking, playfulness, dancing, or even like yoga nidra is one of my favorite embodied but restful and restorative ones where we're so in our sensations, the sensation level, and not moving a muscle or expending any energy other than loving awareness and presence. I think Yoga Nidra is a great one for being present in the body,
Mm.
gentle. Yeah, so those are some of my.
I'll share for people who don't. I have a Yoga Nidra one. You can just look it up on YouTube, but I don't know if you have any on your website, Hannah, but I didn't know what it was. And we started to use it in our groups. And it's basically like lay on the ground. This amazing music is playing, and someone's just being like, notice your fingertips, notice your, and you're just like noticing, but you're not doing anything. And it's this other form of yoga. And that research has shown it has all these amazing benefits. It's the equivalent. You can be awake the whole time, and it's the equivalent of a lot of sleep.
Mm.
Yeah. And just as you're talking about nervous system, in case people are like, wait, what's ventral vagal and this and that? I mean, it's basically the dorsal vagal. It's, you named it, like shut down. It's the places where we feel collapse. And like I think of animals, like it's frozen, it's freeze, it's
Yes,
collapse. I don't
exactly.
have any agency. And then whenever you start to wake up the nervous system and you get into sympathetic, it's where, like you said, fight or flight happens, but there's more activation. There's like more, you're not in collapse, you're alive. So I love you offering that piece around. That's where maybe in case there's fight or flight, you might be too activated if you're just like, I'm going to shake or I'm going to run. But if you're listening to someone else guide you through a movement practice like Qigong or like a yoga, it's like, oh, I'm just following. So you're engaged, but you're not having to generate anything. You're just following until you come into what, you're describing as regulation. And like, okay, now I feel like I can do things. I'm not either freaking out or collapsed or I have more.
And I think one thing that's really important about the polyvagal theory nervous system, which is just what we're describing right now, is that resilience and elasticity and choice is what we're after. So like nobody is going to be in ventral vagal, which is safe, connected, aware, curious, playful, learning new things. Nobody's going to be there all the time on the very, very best of days.
Yeah.
You're on the beach all day and you've got nothing to do and the kids are taken care of. Like you're still not going to be in ventral vagal the whole day. That's not the point of the body. You wouldn't digest if you were there. You need to be in parasympathetic to digest or sleep. Or you wouldn't like get out of the sun and get into the shade because you're burning if you didn't have a little sympathetic activation, right? Like we are always somewhere on the ladder, dorsal at the bottom, sympathetic in the middle, ventral vagal at the top. We're always somewhere on the ladder, and we're always supposed to be somewhere on the ladder. And what we want is just the awareness of, well, where am I? And what tools do I have to at least get maybe like a finger on the rung of ventral vagal. I'm not going to live in ventral vagal because like I'm not a Buddha. Like I'm a human and it's messy and it's weird and it's wild in here. And if I can just have one finger on that realm, I'm going to stay out of total panic or total collapse. And I actually teach a 2-hour workshop on this called Somatic Toolkit for Resilience, where I give a little like psycho ed on it, on the why and the how and the what. And I give over 28 tools to move through the various systems back into regulation, including some of the ones we just mentioned. Because you can't think your way through the nervous system. You can't talk your way through the nervous system, and you can't shame your way through the nervous system. It's physiological. We have to move and breathe and hum our way up and down the ladder.
I'm getting a lot of validation right now as a parent. I know this has nothing to do with grief, but I'm feeling really good about myself as a mom. So I'm going to pat myself on the back because that doesn't always happen in the world. But this year I started homeschooling our boys, Rebecca being one of my homeschool mentors and another friend of mine. And one of the reasons there were a whole host of reasons why I did it, but I remember having this clear moment one day where I was like, I really need to work with my husband so that we can feel confident about doing this, because my little boy was learning how to read and he was like on the couch, sideways, head hanging off the couch. And I could see it was so hard. You know, he's trying to figure out letters and sounds and putting together and sentences, and his brain is like when they're really babies and you can see when they figure out how to like grasp something, like you could just watch it in motion. And I was like, I had this moment where I was like, oh my goodness, if he was in a traditional school, or when he's in traditional school, they were at that time, they would be told to sit still and concentrate. I just like was watching him, and he got through this really difficult thing that he wanted to read, and he did it. And he did it upside down, but he did it. And so now in homeschool, I can sense like when they're starting to they can't have a breakthrough on something. And I'm like, wiggle break. I'm just like, stop, wiggle break, go jump on the trampoline. Now it's jumping on the sofas because it's too cold. Jump on the sofas, like, but you have to move, like wiggle it out. And they come back and it is like a new child. They just like break through almost instantly. And I'm just like, whoa. Or like we're learning the piano. One of them's learning the piano and I'll take his little hand and I'll just shake, 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 shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it. And then I'll place it, really gently back on the keys. And he's like, ah. Or sometimes he'll be like, shake my hand, Mom. And so I don't know. I'm feeling really like, okay, you're doing something right, Mom.
The intuitive wisdom there is off the charts. And I'm just going to plug in this book. I can't remember the author, but it's called The Extended Mind, Thinking Outside the Brain. And it's saying it's everything that you just named.
Beautiful.
It's everything you just, our whole idea of learning is backwards, absolutely backwards. And I would say the same thing goes with feeling and even just talking about our feelings. Feelings are physiological. They need to be felt. And then they can be granular and talk about it and get intuition about it and insight about it. But if we can't think our feelings, we have to actually feel our feelings, and that's physical.
Oh, geez. Say that one more time because it makes perfect sense. And yet I feel like we all need to hear that one more time.
So we can't think or talk our feelings into a different state. We have to feel our feelings. They are physiological. They come from the burp that our pancreas just had, sending up a gas, which brought online a memory, which is like now in our bodies. We can get granular with it and we can talk it through once we have felt them, but we have to feel them. I mean, emotion, energy in motion. That's what emotions and feelings are. And I wanted to add in my morning practice, which is somewhat complicated, but I wanted to add into like the two simplest parts as an invitation, especially during the holidays. After I've like made my coffee and my lemon water, because that always comes first, I go outside with a pinch of tobacco. I offer it to the tree in my backyard because I'm so blessed that we are staying in my in-laws' house right now, and they've got this great maple tree in the backyard. And I offer that to Mama Earth. And I put my arms around the tree and I cry, whether I have something to cry about or not. I'm just like, here's my grief, Mama Earth. Like, I know that this is our reciprocal relationship. Here's my grief. So I let it move through, whether there's something to grieve or not. And I try not to think about things I could grieve about because that just gets me into my head. I'm like, there's going to be some layer of grief in my body. Let's have it. So I have some tears, and maybe some days I don't have some tears, but I have some breath. And then I go and I get on my little mini rebounder trampoline and I put on a killer song. And I'm like, let's go. And I just let all the grief move through my body. And I actually offer this to my ancestors. And I'm like, listen, you don't get to do your work through my body. Like, that's a hard boundary for me. Is that my unwise and well ancestors don't get to grieve through me. But here's what I'm offering. They can do this with me. We can do this together. The ancestors that have so much grief, let's shake it out. Let's do it together. This is my offer. And I just imagine the grief draining through my body. And I'm also like loosening up. I'm not one of those people who can like wake up and start lifting weights. Like my body's like, like I feel like I'm made of like straw that's like brittle and cracky and crunchy in the morning because like I'm 47 and have Lyme disease. And I wake up like, and so just the gentle balancing. My feet don't even leave the surface of the trampoline. Oh God, I get off and I'm like, hey, today I could do this. So that's another, like one of my offerings for the listeners. Stuff's got to move. If we move it out before our brain's even online to think about it, it's really great. Like we're still in that kind of liminal
space. And as you're saying this, I'm also reminded, I know a little bit of the story of your friend Allie and walking her through her death and how you sustained yourself in that process to be with death.
Yeah. That was wild. That was one of those things that you say yes to that you're like 100% unprepared for, but like something in you just goes like, if not me, who?
Yeah.
Right? So I had this beautiful, beautiful friend who was maybe like a year older than me or something. So she was like 41 at the time. And we had supported each other through hard times. She also had Lyme, but she also had fibromyalgia and she had other things going on as well. She had complications. And so I ended up basically becoming her death doula, which I don't think I knew was a thing at the time.
Mhm.
And calling in resources of like, okay, oh, I know this person works in hospice, and actually this person works in the shamanic realm,
Mhm.
and just sort of pulling in resources and just spending hours and hours and hours and hours on the phone with people, helping me start to understand how can I help this person die, and then just driving down to Denver whenever I could, as often as I could, minimum once a week, and just being with her in this process. And then what happened was that my body was like too much, and I broke my elbow. I literally like fell off my son's circus ball and shattered my elbow. But I couldn't drive myself down to Denver. And so we needed a whole team to arrive. And so this whole team arose of high school friends, friends of the family. And there were like 12 of us, and we were called Allie's Angels. And I was sort of guiding it because I was deep in my Buddhist practice at the time. And so knew a fair amount about death and dying in that tradition.
Mhm.
And so sort of wove together this team of this is how we're going to hold her. We're going to hold her in love and compassion and prayer. And we're going to honor the body in the process and do the 3 days of vigilance after she passes and keep her at home and just sit with her. And so we just had somebody with her 24 hours a day, and then started with palliative care, and that turned into hospice. And then we brought in shamanic journey support to show her where she was going
Mhm.
after she died. And a lot of the practice was me lying in bed with her and holding and rocking her and soothing her and stroking her, bathing her, being with her in her agitation and irritation, and picking fights with us all and accusing us of crazy stuff, because like that's what happens
Mhm.
when the body shuts down. Like you go a little crazy, and it wasn't her fault. And so like relying on compassion practice and patience. And what I would do is either, so I would take in Ubers back and forth when I broke my elbow. And then when I was driving again, I would listen to deeply powerful, moving music, Arms of the Angels by Sarah McLachlan. I would have that on repeat.
Mhm.
But I would also have these orchestral pieces, and this is, big pieces, Niels Fromm and people like that. And I would just, on the car ride there and the car ride back, because I still had a little one at this point. My kid was still pretty young. I was still a lot of parenting and teaching dance regularly
Mhm.
and being a mom and a wife and all the things. So like I didn't have so much extra time. So on the car ride there and back, I would literally just be in a full body dance in the car. And then when I would get to her house and park before I got out, I would do a big for some full body movements. And then while I was with her and she was napping or sleeping, I would put music on and be moving. And then when I would leave her house, I would shake it out and shake it out and shake it out and shake it out, and like really keen the whole way back in the car, like keen to music and make sounds and eat a lot of chocolate. Like a lot of chocolate
Mhm.
as another resource, and just like really keen and wail. And then when I got home, what started happening at the same time, and the timing of this was so intense, was that the Shambhala, my whole world fell apart. The whole Shambhala hit a Me Too movement. We call it the Shambhacalypse, where our teacher was accused of sexual misdemeanors and handled it about as bad as any human could ever handle
Yeah.
it. And so my whole world fell apart that way. And my grandmother died, which there was a lot of stuff with because she was a narcissist and it was a complicated
Mhm.
relationship. And so there was so much happening at the same time. And so my body was just fraught with emotion and anxiety. And so I did so much Qigong, so much shaking, wailing, and keening, and kept teaching my classes, which was such a resource for me. I really resourced just from teaching.
Mhm.
And then so many walks and talks with friends where, again, we're in that bilateral movement. We're outside. It was spring, thank God. And then I actually did a whole solo grief retreat in the mountains. My in-laws have a house up in the mountains. So I did a whole grief retreat where I made grief altars outside every
Mhm.
day. I did my practices. I did a lot of yoga nidra and body support in that way. And I danced and I danced and I danced and I danced and I wailed and I keened and I danced.
What is keening? I don't know that word.
Keening is like a wail that comes from the deepest part of your belly. In like Celtic traditions,
Mhm.
you will like hire women to keen during like the memorial march to the cemetery and the graveyard.
Mhm.
And it's like this practice of like from the deepest part of like almost our reproductive organs up through our belly come these sounds that are like guttural and real. And they are like the sounds we make
Mhm.
when death has occurred and we don't even know how to take the next breath. It's like wailing, mourning, keening. I did a lot of keening, but I did a lot of keening through like my whole body.
Yeah.
Like not stationary keening, but keening through my spine, almost as if I was gonna like, whoosh.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful. I love this story because you're like in the constraints of things like being in a car,
Mm-hmm.
going to and from.
Yeah.
And I'll do that a lot. I'm like, I want to dance right now, but I'm like in a car. And every once in a while, I become aware of potentially the people next to me noticing me. And then I think, I'm moving my body. You might think I'm a total weirdo, but like, you could also be just dancing in your car. And it's powerful the way that that can just help move energy. And I would have called it just like screaming and yelling, but probably some keening being in there too.
I always think when people are next to me, I'm always like delighted when I see someone just totally rocking out in their car. Like I'm always just so delighted. I'm like, I better find a song I love that much. Like it inspires me. So I always think I'm delighting someone,
Yes.
My favorite car story ever, because I'm often the person where people look over and I'm like, yeah.
Right, right.
My favorite story of that is my sister and my niece and I were in the car and we look over at the stoplight and the person next to us is sobbing and eating Ben and Jerry's right out of the pint like
I love
this.
it.
And we're like, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's like, I just feel like we just get to celebrate each other, like taking care of ourselves in the best way we know how.
Totally.
I love how much permission, and I particularly, as someone who has a lot of self consciousness around dancing, and I absolutely recognize like where it comes from. It comes from being a woman, it comes from being Latina, and people think I should just be able to get on the floor and fucking salsa dance. Like, and I'm like, that thing you do with your spine, mine does not do that. And so I think I just have a lot of like self judgment. But the permission that you give with these smaller things, I'm like, that I can do. Like, oh, I can shake it out, or I
Mm-hmm.
can like feel the power, the reciprocity between my body and the earth when I just kind of like slam my heels onto the ground and feel that back and forth. As
Mm-hmm.
part of my grieving process, I took up drumming, like rock and roll drumming, like a drum kit. And so using my four limbs, they complement each other, but are not doing the same thing. I can feel it. And when I'm just like in my office, it's so loud. Somebody came to watch the other day and they were like, not watch, like I put on little shows, but like, Andrea, will you drum for me? And they were like, that was like a sound bath. And I was like, you are going to lose hearing if you ever come do that again. It's so loud. But it feels so good. So I just love all of the different avenues and invitations that you give, and hearing what people have said about being in your spaces, about that safety and that confidence to be able to move through. I mean, I know that was Rebecca, has shared that same experience with you. So I just love it. So for those of us who are listening, who
Mm-hmm.
are having that like, oh my God, I cannot dance in front of people, I feel you. And I love the invitations, the variety of invitations you've given us to move our bodies, even if we have some discomfort with dance. Yeah.
Mm.
When people ask about my events and they're like, well, I'm not a dancer, I'm like, that's good. That's not what we're doing. We're moving.
Right.
I'm like, you're human.
Yeah. The first movement thing that I went to that was like that was what movement mass. And I had heard about it a lot. Like for a year, people were like, let's go, let's go. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not. That's not my thing. And then when I was in grief and I was just in a place where, I knew I needed something. And I went and I thought, even if I don't dance, because I knew like I had to give myself permission to not move, and I sit in a corner and cry the whole time that I won't dance, I'm going to go and cry. Like, I'm just going to go and do it. But of course, the way that it was, you are looking down, you're just walking, you're just, and so I was like, this is safe. I know how to walk, and I don't actually have to interact with all these humans. And it was just like a gradual thing for me. But what it started to open up for me was dancing alone. And so that part where I'm like, oh, I still don't like dancing, but dancing alone felt like, I mean, you're talking about ancestors. I feel sometimes like there's something that is rejoicing in my dancing, and I'm just dancing with spirit. I never feel alone when I'm dancing at home, but it's just I'm without all the judgment. Is what's nice. So Yeah.
Exactly. And, people have come to my class and I know they're moving through something and they're like, I'm not going to be able to dance today. And I'm like, who said you had to dance today?
Mhm.
And
Mm.
I'm sure you've seen this, Rebecca, where people never, we start in a body scan laying down on like a yoga mat. People never leave their
Yeah.
yoga mat. And at the end of class, they're like, I got so much from feeling people's footsteps and the vibration and the music and knowing I get to be here in this community as I am feeling what I'm feeling. And that might be dance and it might not be.
Yes.
Or I've quite literally spent half my time as a teacher of these classes with somebody in my lap
Mm.
wailing, having so much grief or so much anxiety or so much whatever. And I'm wrapped around them and I'm like still giving cues. I'm like, all right, everybody bring your awareness to your feet. Let's go for this one. It's all feet and toes. Go. And then I'm like, turn my mic off and I'm like, breathe, feel my hand on your back. It's like those spaces of movement. We might not even really be up and having the movement, but something in us is invited to move.
Yes. Oh.
And like that's like my favorite. Like I just got back from 3 weeks in Mexico and I found a yoga teacher there. So I started going to this yoga class every day and I loved the teacher. But what she never said was like, and if you just need to rest or lay down, any expression of the pose is the pose. Child's pose for the whole class, you're welcome. She'd be like, come on, push, lift your leg up, to these people who like definitely could not.
Oh.
And I was just like, oh, there's like no permission in this space. And it like hurt my heart. And like, who the fuck am I to walk into this yoga community, and be like, so options make a space safe. This is really not trauma informed. There's no choice. And so I just did my thing and tried to stay in my lane. But like, it like hurt my heart. I'm like,
Yeah.
if people are in the room, it's enough.
Yes.
It's
Thank
enough.
you.
Like when people come, they're like, I'm really like, some people come to my Dancing on the Earth workshops and I'm like, listen, if you wander in nature the whole time and you never come back to the circle and dance, you win. You've probably had the best morning of all of us. If you are laying under the tree and looking up through the fractals of branches and seeing the sky and you never get off your mat, you might have the best class of anybody.
Yeah.
Just be in your body any way you can. And it might ideally involve a little bit of movement, even small movements, and maybe not, but just being part of the community of movement. Our nervous systems regulate to that. We get that coherence, that heart coherence that like we can't avoid. It's physiology, it's physics. It's not like woo-woo, it's physics. So, to be welcome in all these spaces, no matter how we show up, is really important.
Yes, definitely.
Well, that's why I give 3 riverbanks before I teach workshops, classes, anything I teach, 3 riverbanks. Number 1, you are the authority on your body. No one else gets to say what works for you and what doesn't. Number 2, follow your body's wisdom, not your head being like, I should participate or I should go hard now because the music is hard. Your body knows best. Follow the wisdom of your soma, not your shoulds. And number 3, everything is invitation only. Like we're doing a group dance. You join if you want. You don't if you don't. We're doing a wander in nature. You're in Shavasana. Amen. Like we have to create safety because we're not raised the way, Andrea, you are raising your boys to be like, you learn to read because your vestibular system is upside down and you're getting this sensory feedback that's getting the right kind of blood to your brain and you're engaged. Or like you shook out your hand and you let go of that old muscle memory so you could create a new one. Not everybody is teaching us that we can follow our body's wisdom to get where we need to go. And so like, that's why everything needs to be trauma informed and invitation only, because we've all been traumatized into like we're all like undoing some kind of like movement trauma we've had, which breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because like movement is what enables us to process and integrate, to be with and express, to defend, to discharge, to regulate and soothe what the brain has no words for and what's beyond stories and meaning making. It's being alive with what is right now. And that's all we can ever be with. We can't be with what's going to happen. And we can be with what has been, but only in the present moment, only as it's alive in us right now. Not as it was 20 years ago, as it is right now and how it is here and now. That's what movement is. Freedom.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you. It brought tears to my eyes. I just also feel like female-bodied people, we have rarely, if ever, been given those riverbanks of permissions, And so I think about
Yes.
that a lot, or even with my boys, about when they were in school. I think we do more now with young
Yeah.
girls about permission, about who can be in your space and touching you, but they would often have girls touching them that made
Yeah.
them really uncomfortable. And so also teaching them about both sides of that boundary. And anyway, that's so beautiful just in life, but what a beautiful space you create in a
Yeah.
class for people to have that and to have that language and to be able to sort of like lean into that somatic knowing, that knowing of their body and what feels right.
Hmm.
Hannah, thank you so much. Yes, your dance classes have permission to just be. The
Hmm.
times I'm in your class where I'm like, Hannah said we could lay here, but I'm the only one here. Are we sure that that's okay? But just being like, okay, just keep being here, just keep
Yeah.
being here. And then feeling your love at the end of class. And I was like, okay, she meant it. She's not mad at me. And it's like, this is
Hmm.
permission I just don't even give myself. And yeah, so I just appreciated all these different ways of
Hmm.
working with our bodies, which you're right, we grieve in our bodies.
Yeah.
We'll have all of Hannah's contact stuff in our notes. And then, yes, Hannah and I will be leading a grief and movement event together.
Yeah.
Andrea, have you been touching into your grief this week?
Well, you mentioned this briefly in the introduction, but we had our very first in-person grief gathering, and it was like all this preparation to get to it, and then being in this space with these amazing people all day and continuing to sort of feel the beautiful impacts of that shared space and that container, and witnessing everyone be able to express their own grief and connect and see each other in everyone else's grief. It was just so beautifully human in all of its sort of complexity of like eyes opening and like, maybe flares of like questioning or judgment or whatever, just all these things, but everything just moving past all of it for all of us just to be there with each other and holding each other. It was just such a beautiful day. And I think my heart continues, you said this earlier, to feel really tender in a way of like gratitude for being able to have found this path with you. Grief is such a loving human condition, and it's so tender and can be so sad and can be so overwhelming, but it's also so beautiful and humbling and also like heart opening. So I just am sort of in this space of awe and tenderness and tremendous love right now. Yeah.
Thank you. How about you, Hannah? How are you touching into your grief this week?
Hmm. I would say in letting go is how I've been touching into my grief. We are on the precipice of being empty nesters, and it is the biggest letting go. I mean, I've been in the stage of letting go of knowing what's right for my son or being in the kind of mom that I was his whole life. I've been in that for about 3-4 years now, but now it's like, whoa, I've never not lived with you.
Oh,
And so it's in these moments where he passes out on the love seat when he gets home and watching him sleep and feeling like, oh, my heart. Like, there's my heart on the couch,
yeah.
off in the world, doing its own thing. And so I'm in this very much this letting go, letting go of what was my life for the last 18 years into what it will be, which of course I have no idea. And I'm very much in that tenderness. And then also just in it with my clients. It seems that always when Thanksgiving comes up, grief arises. And so just very much moving through grief somatically and holding so much loving accompaniment for my clients just brings me right into that vortex with them of just
Mm-hmm.
feeling so much tenderness for the grief that they are in right now. And I have a couple friends who've lost parents recently or whose partners have had hard diagnoses. So just the way our lives weave together and how everyone's grief is our grief.
Mm-hmm.
And also, how do I stay super resilient so I can support them
Mm-hmm.
and support myself? So, like a lot of just being with and tending, being with and tending, being with and tending. My dear Rebecca, how has grief shown up for you?
Thank you. Oh, I mean, just ditto what you're sharing, Andrea, but I had this specific thing that is just like cracked my heart open this week. So I'm gonna cry, which is beautiful. I love when I can cry because I don't cry on command like you, Andrea. I'm
No, I
like,
could have been an actress.
or even like you're like, I hugged a tree, Hannah, and you're like, and then I cry, and I'm like, I'd be like, it'd just be effort. It'd be so much effort. But I went to the library. I was going to pick up. I always just do the books on hold. They had one book, and I was like, okay, I'm going to just run and pick it up. And they always have this little round table that's 3 layers high of all the staff recommends. And I saw this. I was drawn to the artwork on it, and it's a kid's book, but it said it's something like a hare-shaped hole, the rabbit hare, Hare. And I knew immediately, I was like, this is a grief book. And I picked it up and just saw the staff, whoever recommended it. And I'll post it on my Instagram, but she had like sad faces and was like, it's really sad, and I was like, yep. Grief book. And so I waited until this morning when I had this moment of silence and everyone was not in my house. And I was like, okay, I'm going to read it. It's so fucking sweet. And it's this turtle and this hare are friends. And they're like professing their love and how they're just going to like love each other till the end. And it talks about all the sweet things that they do for each other. And then the end came and the hare wasn't there. But everywhere that the turtle was, there was this hare-shaped hole. And it like broke my heart. Like there was nothing he could do to get rid of it. And so they just had this little outline of the hare drawn with him everywhere. And then this bear, Mama Bear, comes along and is basically, I mean, like the adult version, because I'm not going to I read it once and I was just like in tears, but she's like, oh, it's always going to be there. Like you don't get rid of it. You just learn basically to walk with it. So she's like, you fill it with like every memory of all the things you loved and all, and she talks about we all have these, and whether it's by death or friends move or, and so just names all the way that grief can kind of show up and that we would lose people. And so then he's just like sitting with his little hare-shaped hole friend in the end. And the bear there's like a bear-shaped hole that she's walking with, and they're both just like walking with their grief. And I was like, this is such a good fucking book. I love books for kids because I think we don't know how to talk to kids about grief. It's really sweet. So
Oh, I love it.
All right. Well,
we are so grateful. Yes, thank you so much. What beautiful offerings today in this interview, and just that you are giving out to the world. So thank you so much, Hannah.
Oh, thank you both so much for being exactly who you are and holding this exactly the way you do. It's just such good medicine for our planet, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
Truly.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.